Should we leave the past behind? Coco and Spider-Man No Way Home are not commonly discussed together, but there is a hidden link between them. These two films, in entirely different ways, confront the reality of being forgotten. One encounters the finality, the other, the Inglorious Sacrifice. If we take the time to understand this connection, perhaps we can begin to comprehend our complex relationship to the past and our sacrifices for a better future. Let's look at each separately and then together. The past is fighting for our attention. Are we listening? In the unique world of Coco, there are two distinct questions related to existence. What happens when we die? What happens when we are forgotten? Inside, we are invited to a place where the dead have not perished, but instead continue to endure in a colorful afterlife. They are alive in a different way, with them even being allowed to return to the mortal world on the Day of the Dead, provided their picture is placed on a mantle. On this special day, the living tell stories of their ancestors, to remember them, and to ensure their continued existence, which is conditional on the living's memory. Emotionally driven home in the song Remember Me, the film suggests that the only thing worse than dying is the final death, being forgotten. In Coco, we will look into communicating with the past and what remembering can truly accomplish. At the core of Coco, the film addresses the communication between us and our ancestors. It's how we learn from those who are not alive in our present world, or said differently, it's what we can learn from communicating between past and present, not communicating with the dead in a necromantic way. The past, not the dead, is reaching out to the present, desperately attempting to speak with us. As I asked earlier, are we listening? Coco's characters fight with this question. The family remembers and venerates most of their ancestors, but is actively trying to suppress Hector, his music, and his choice to leave the family. There is no communication with the past Hector represents. The family wants to forget some elements of their history. They are actively attempting to remove attention from Hector and from music itself. They want to forget some elements of the truth. Hector is desperate to have his family remember him. To be forgotten is final. His family has intentionally attempted to forget him because of his mistake. He chose to leave the comfort of his home to leave his family in search of something better. However, the hidden side of his story is his attempted redemption. He leaves his music dream behind to reconcile with his family, but tragically, he's killed before he returns. Through the family's rejection of Hector, we as an audience can see the error in the rejection of memory and truth. It's important to hold not just the memory of someone, but the truth inside their story. This is not just a rosy picture of only the good. Truth contains the good and the bad, struggles and victories, the sin and reconciliation. Even if Hector never attempted to make things right, it would be valuable to remember his whole story, to share with future members of the family of what he did right and wrong. To have reverence for the past, for history, we learn from the entirety of the story and the truth inside. When we forget about people, intentionally or not, we forget their lessons. People are not perfect. Thus, their story contains vital information of what to do but also what not to do. We can learn from mistakes and sin, as well as victories and virtue. This is part of the explanation of saints. Their struggle, their path upward is a core part of what we are asked to learn. Therefore, we remember saints, we venerate them, we tell their story, we hold feasts in honor of them, so their stories can be shared at the table across generations. The saints, a great cloud of witnesses, are cheering us on, rooting for us to follow the right path, an aim of truth, goodness, and beauty. Perhaps we don't operate as individuals alone. Perhaps in some way we can't fully explain, the past is here with us, helping us move forward. Coco also has much to say on what to remember, as we can see in the contrast of former friends Ernesto de la Cruz and Hector. Specifically, their reasons for making music highlight an important part. De la Cruz plays music and Remember Me for fame and ego. Hector wrote the song to connect with his daughter Coco, for her to be comforted every night while he was away. De la Cruz wants people to remember him for his ego, for reputation. Hector for love of family. De la Cruz plays music for himself, Hector for others. Miguel, in his journey to the dead, to the past, explores the philosophy, quote-unquote, of seize your moment. This false aim of life leads to selfish and sinful pursuits, as seen through the egotistical and murderous Ernesto de la Cruz. Miguel has to discover that he and others around him have been tricked. De la Cruz eventually gets his comeuppance, and in alignment with what we have covered, his grave is covered with the final insult, "Forget you," previewing his own final death. He is now shamed, destroyed by ego, and will be ultimately forgotten. Not only do we attempt to reveal the truth in our history, but also expose the lies. Through prudent discernment, we justly select what is to be remembered. To his credit, Miguel eventually judges correctly. His journey through the past exposes these lies and brings home the fullness of truth. Miguel must reject De La Cruz's corrupting lies and resurrect the memory of truth inside his family's story. He must help himself and his family remember. To remember is to hold attention that what is not in the present. It is a knowledge of the past and how it relates to the present. Through memory, we make time dynamic. In a way, we travel through time. Jonathan Pageau has mentioned that to invoke, to remember, to focus our attention on God primarily is an operation of the soul, quote unquote. It allows us to enter into the heart. Part of that idea is to participate beyond the material world. We exist in a world that is a union of the physical and the divine. There is more beyond what we see and touch, beyond what science can quantify and measure. Coco creates a world where there is an operation of the soul. Pair this with our theme of being remembered. If memory is this operation of the soul, then to be forgotten is to sever the link between our materialistic side and our spiritual side. It is the severing of the link between man and God. In times of spiritual coldness and laziness, imagine in your heart those times in the past when you were full of zeal and solicitude in all things, even the smallest. Remember your past efforts and the energy in which you opposed those who wanted to obstruct your progress. These recollections will reawaken your soul from its deep sleep, will invest it once more with the fire of zeal, will raise it as it were from the dead, and will make it engage in an ardent struggle against the devil and sin, thus being restored to its former height. Saint Isaac of Syria. What is worse than dying? Being forgotten, the final death. Removing a link between man and God. Hector left home. He journeyed into the world to find something greater, yet was unable to return. We all leave home in some form, but what is our pathway back? To remember, to be remembered, to reconnect with something bigger than us, beyond us. Don't sever the connection to the spiritual, to the operation of the soul. Miguel and Hector's conclusion helps bring a fuller understanding of the importance of memory. At the end of the movie, both must complete their journey and come home. Miguel is tasked to return, to find a path back, and to bring home the knowledge of the past and carry forward into the future. Never forget how much your family loves you. You are going home. From there, Miguel can help Hector complete his journey by helping Coco restore her memories of her dad, and therefore recover the photo. Hector is vindicated, and the family re-embraces their heritage in music. His choice to risk adventure is ultimately incorporated into the fabric of the family. The past, the truth, has been remembered. The lies have been exposed. The lessons have been learned. The sins reconciled. The human connected to something bigger and beyond. And now with his photo returned, and the finality of being forgotten avoided, Hector finally comes home. When Aunt May delivers the "with great power comes great responsibility" line, the twist hidden inside the entire MCU Spider-Man trilogy emerged. We assumed the unmentioned Uncle Ben had said it long ago, but there was no reason to cover this again. But all this time we spent with Peter, all 6 movies, from Civil War to No Way Home, had been an origin story. We thought we didn't need the Spider-Bite and Uncle Ben. Instead, we are treated to how Peter truly became Spider-Man, by sacrifice. Spider-Man No Way Home tackles this idea of being forgotten, but in a different way. In Coco, the drama played out between family members. But in No Way Home, the primary struggle exists inside the duality of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. It is the alter ego versus the superhero. Doctor Strange's spell, the inciting incident of the story, is born of Peter wanting people to forget he is Spider-Man, yet he hedges and amends his request as the reality hit him. As an immature kid would do, he doesn't fully comprehend the reality of what he is requesting, causing dangerous revisions and unstable interventions. By the end, to fix what he has broken and through further circumstance, Peter accepts the sacrifice he must make. He must be forgotten by all. This is Peter's Inglorious Sacrifice. The reward of his bravery, of saving the world, is to be forgotten. No gratitude, no parade, no reward. Nassim Taleb brought up a similar idea in his book The Black Swan. Due to silent evidence, there are silent heroes, or heroes mistreated by history. His theoretical example, summarized, deals with security measures in the 9/11 attacks. Hypothetically, let's say there were rules put into place on September 10th that required bulletproof, continuously locked doors on cockpits. Assume this prevented the terrorist attacks entirely, saving thousands of lives. Would the public celebrate the people who put these measures in place? Most likely not, as they did not see what was prevented. Sadly, the measures would most likely be criticized as the doors would come at increased cost to the airlines and passed on to consumers. The heroic preventative act would be met with negativity. The recognizable and celebrated hero is one of positive action or treatment to a threat. But the silent hero withers in obscurity. As Taleb writes, few reward acts of prevention. Due to the unseen future and the silent evidence of brave and heroic action, we will never see these events. Taleb laments the real silent hero. I wish I could go attend his funeral, but reader, I can't find him. Unfair, yes, but perhaps more admirable. The real virtue of the deed outweighs the reward. Perhaps Peter chooses to become the silent hero. When one dies, we can fairly say that the burden of grief lies on the loved ones. When one is forgotten, the burden of grief falls on the subject. Peter Parker not only experiences a self-sacrificial death of his life as he knows it to save his loved ones and the world, but he also accepts the burden of grief. This is a full removal of the self in a pursuit of goodness. We can see the elevation of the virtue of humility and the removal of the sin of pride in this act. A truly virtuous act must be removed from ego. This idea is not new. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, condemns virtuous acts done for the sake of pride. Whether almsgiving, praying, or fasting, acts of virtue must be completed without recognition, without inflation of ego, status, and pride. Repeated a few times in Matthew, the point is emphatically driven home, for even virtue can be corrupted by sin. The emphasis is on the intent. Spiritual remedies like almsgiving, prayer, and fasting lead to virtue when done with the right intention. In a slightly different way, Peter emulates this prideless virtue and chooses to become our silent hero. Peter sees his future and purpose, not in the self-centered pursuits of Peter Parker, but in Spider-Man. Peter is the alter ego. Spider-Man is the hero. Reject the ego, become the hero. The world does not need to remember Peter, but the goodness and virtue of Spider-Man. If sacrifice is the losing of something of value now to bring forth something better in the future, Peter must be sacrificed for a better world to exist. And Peter's sacrifice is through being voluntarily forgotten. There is a time to leave the world you know behind. There is a time to leave the comfort of home. As adults, we are asked to leave the safety and comfort of our home and family. We venture into the apparent disorder of the outside world and build something new. A new life, a new country, a new business, a new home. This masculine quality is part of growing up. I discussed this quality briefly in the video on Eowyn. No Way Home shows that, to mature, we must forget or sacrifice parts of ourselves. Like a parent forgetting a hobby that he or she enjoyed, allowing for time with the new child to help them grow. We only find ourselves when we lose ourselves in something bigger. The maturation of Peter is even suggested in the trilogy titles. Peter progresses from conflict at homecoming to venturing far from home, to accepting that there is no way home. Born from his sacrifice and humility, Peter leaves his past behind and builds a new life. At the end of No Way Home, we see a new, humbled Spider-Man. His simple, even lowly apartment, a far cry from his past dwellings. His new hand-sewn suit seen in contrast to the technologically advanced version. Humility over pride, a great virtue over a deadly sin. The difference between the Avengers Spider-Man and the end of No Way Home Spider-Man is sincere sacrifice. And his sacrifice is through the destruction of ego, by removing what Peter wants, by removing the glory that Peter would receive. To repeat the idea, he found himself only after he gave himself away, self-sacrifice in another form. Together within Coco and No Way Home, we see a more comprehensive lesson. There is a time that we need to leave our home. Don't forget the past and the truth it brings, ugly or not. The truth exists outside our pride and ego, ourselves. Therefore, humility and even self-sacrifice are necessary. We don't just remember a person for the sake of their own ego, but for the virtue, the truth, the goodness and beauty they reflect. There are things like the past and truth we should fight to remember. We should not sever the link between man and God, but there are also things like our egos or lies that we should forget and let die, even ourselves at times. Each film asks, should we leave the past behind us? In Coco, the truth held by our ancestors points to a resounding no. In Spider-Man, the pain our ego or alter ego can cause points to a heartbreaking yes. Here our link between these two films becomes clear. Hector and Miguel left home and fought to be remembered. Peter left home to be forgotten. Although their stories are different, Miguel and Hector, along with Peter Parker, are compelled to face a painful truth. Remember me, for if I am forgotten, there will be no way home.